Hello, my name is Sierra Milliman, and I am going to be talking about the seven elements of art. So, for the seven elements, we have line, color, value, which is more like the hue, the tint, the shade, that kind of thing, shape, form, texture, and space. So, I have my list of books picked out, and I am going to be sharing with everybody how the arts, how the illustrations help with the story, um, and just talk about all the different ways that the pictures correlate with the story and how they enhance the story pretty much. Um, so this is my first time doing the Zoom video, and I'm not 100% perfect at everything, so I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I did a few practice rounds, but with the screen sharing, um, I did all of my stories from Storyline Online, mostly because I didn't want to be switching back and forth between websites because I felt that would maybe make the Zoom video not as flowy. And so there's that. And also, I'm going to apologize ahead of time. We live out in the middle of the country and our internet is not great. So there is probably going to be times where I'm trying to show you the pictures from the videos and they're not going to want to load right away. Um, so, first off, I did Line. That's my first ones. In my first book, I found was when Picasso met Matisse. And what this story is about is when a pig named Picasso and a cow named Matisse, they are both artists. Obviously, they're named after the famous artists. And it talks about how their art styles kind of collided, but eventually they became friends and worked together and created this beautiful masterpiece. Um, so I liked this book because when they were talking about Picasso, obviously Picasso used a lot of harsh lines in all of his works of art, and so it they brought that feature and his kind of key elements that he uses in his work in Picasso's work in and made that for Picasso. And not only did they make it in for Picasso's works of art, which is kind of what is shown here, that's what the pig painted, but they also used it to help out with all the harsh lines and showing the harsh lines in any page that they talked about. So it's all throughout the whole page, including in like his paint sets and his body. Um, so they definitely use the art element of line to kind of define what Picasso was and make sure that that connection between Picasso and Picasso was clear. Um, so I thought that was a really great form of line. And I'm trying to remember my notes, sorry. Now, it doesn't use line throughout the whole book, but in a way, that's a good thing for this book. So for Picasso's, it uses the harsh lines, but then when it moved to Matisse, it showed more of these elements. Um, and so it showed more of Matisse's style. and using that for Mutis. Um, so and it goes back and forth. I mean, the entire way. I don't know if it will let me kind of see it, but you can see. Oh, that's when he's reading it. See, we go talking about Picasso, and then we will go back to talking about Matisse, and it continues until they're fighting, and they ended up having a all out fight about their painting styles, and it was basically the art them not really being able to understand one another. And I also liked all the colors that they used. Um, I mean, of course, with being a book about two of the most famous artists of all time, they have to be able to use a lot of colors. And that was another way that they connected Picasso and Matisse to the actual artist. They use these colors that are bright, and instead of just doing a regular green yard and blue sky, they changed the colors and made it more artistic and brought in those aspects into it as well. Um, so we'll see if it will work with me here. And so that was the stories of when Picasso met Matisse, and I thought that was a great illustration of line. Um, Now the next one I have is called No Mirrors. My dogs are going crazy in my Nana's house. And I don't know why there it goes. Wheel. We'll see if I can find it. Oh, there it is. Missed it. Okay, now this one, it used lines, but it was a different way. It was very basic. The lines that it uses are definitely to show where one thing stops and one thing begins. There is no faces in this book, which for this book it works. I know a lot of children's books we want detail and to keep the kids interested, but this one is about a story of a little girl who lives with her nana and how there's no mirrors in the house. So it's really a story about kind of growing up poorly and showing that there's no mirrors, but it's okay. And I'll see if I can find the pictures. But like I said, there is no certain, there's no details, there's no features. And because the beauty was everything, because the beauty and everything was in her eyes. But you can see the lines and the shapes and everything in this one. It was really hard to define just as line. There is a part in it, I don't know if I'll be able to find it, but it showed like the cracks in the walls, and that was the only kind of part of the detail that the lines really showed. And they showed with the cracks. I'll see if I can find it. I know it was in the beginning part, and I can't. But yeah, I'll say it basically, I never knew that my nose was too flat. So all the negativity that would be shown is gone. And I feel like that's kind of another way that the artist was trying to show this book is about simplicity. It's about how they never realized what society might view them as because in their house that was not a thing. It was never mentioned. I mean, they never knew. They never grew up knowing. They had the simplicity of not knowing. And I feel like that's really what the artist was trying to show throughout the pictures. Um, and I think that was the best part about about the pictures. There is, especially, I'm trying to see about it's more of the shapes too, the shapes and the colors, because I mean, as you can see throughout the book, it's simple, it's basic, and it shows a lot of shapes, and it doesn't give great detail. So not only does it have those sharp lines and everything's kind of plain, but the shapes are too. I mean, the backgrounds, they're just plain colors in their boxes. Her earrings is just a circle. I mean, not only does the lines show the simplicity without having the detail too, but also just the simplicity of just adding in basic shapes. This whole book is just squares, circles, dresses. I mean, it's basic, which I really feel is what the illustrations were trying to show. Okay. Now we are going to move on to color. We'll see if it. Let's see. Okay, so for color, the first one I have is Harry the Dirty Dog. And I'm gonna say, go on. This story is cute. I actually almost checked this out for one of the other lessons that we had, but I decided to go against it. So, Harry the Dirty Dog. And yes, this one is read by Betty White. So, what this story is about a dog, and he hates to get a bath. And as you can see, he starts out, he's a white dog with black spots. Um, in this one, the use of the color is mainly in the dog. I mean, of course, there's color throughout the whole book, and it shows that, but it the color that I was focused on, that the to have how the illustrator used this art in to help with the story was the dog, because he goes from this cute white little puppy and he hates getting a bath. So he runs away from home and he gets all sorts of dirty, like absolutely disgusting. And he becomes a black dog with white spots. So he's once he finally heads home, his family does not recognize him. And I feel like that's what the illustrator did to support the story, and that's a huge part of the story. Is they changed the color of the dog, and it definitely shows. He had to show them all sorts of little tricks that only he would know, and so definitely the color there, going from that white to black, to show how the dog went from clean to dirty. And That's the best way to explain it. But I also feel like in this story, the artist used texture. He was able to do the dog's fur and able to do the flowers like in the grass, and he added those texture elements and that design to where we could really see kind of what it would look like. They also used line a lot. I mean, of course, they had to use line, but in this story, it's a little bit more shown, and it's kind of more basic of the line aspects because you can definitely see the outlines that the dog has. But I wouldn't necessarily say that that would be part of enhancing the story. It's just kind of how the artist who had this one drew. But the texture, it does help because if we can go back here, we can kind of see how there's rocks and everything. And this is when he's getting dirty, and it's more of a harsh, rough, gross, dirty element and dirty environment. And that's what the artist was trying to show. Um, so for color, I also used probably a book we all thought about for colors. And I think it was up here. Yes, A Bad Case of Stripes. And obviously, we have all heard this book, and the use of color in this book is off the charts. I mean, there is so much color in this book. And of course, we have the yellows, the greens, the blues, and it really shows what's going on in the story. I mean, they could just say, oh, yeah, she's sick and she's this, and this, and this, but the amount of colors and how bright and defining they are really helps with the story. Um, and it goes in blends, and there's purple, there's blues, and it just, there's so many different colors each time that she, I don't want to say transforms, but has a new side effect show up. I like how the artist used the colors to really make that stand out, that she changed. So they definitely use this. Another one that they would use in this one would be shapes, because they go from shapes and texture really, because they go, if it will pause, it changes so fast, so it's really hard to get a picture of just her without having to go throughout the whole story. But the shapes in there, so I mean, this whole book uses every single one of them. Every single one of the elements. I mean, has the color and the defining shape colors of the red fire truck and the people, and then it has the shapes, and it definitely uses every single shape there is. And on her, it uses stars and circles and a whole bunch of different shapes. And then it goes to form, and you can see the detail of the chair and how she would be sitting on it, and then the texture, and you can see how her tentacles might be kind of slimy and how the feathers might be softer. And then, I mean, the space, you can definitely see, especially in that last section where the people were out, you can, well, not that one, in that picture, you can see how the helicopter is way off into the distance and she's up close, and it uses so many different elements to help bring this story together. And I feel like it's really hard just to pick one second one, just like it was kind of hard to pick a first one for this one. Um, but definitely the color usage is great in this book because it really stands out of how much of an oddball-ish, I don't wanna say oddball, but of an oddball that she morphs into. It shows the color makes everything stand out more so. Um, so for next one, I have value. And value was a lot of the tints and hues and shading and that kind of thing. So these ones are not, they're not, if I can find them, as detailed. Okay, knots on a counting rope. Okay, so this one is a story about.
I'm Bonnie Bartlett. And I'm Bill Durham. And we're here reading for SAG's Book Panel. We're doing a story today.
Well, sorry, I'm trying to make sure it goes and then it's not wanting to listen to me. Is a grandfather telling the story. So I picked this one for value because all throughout the story it definitely gives the dark sky going in, and you can see the light of the fire around them and how they're shadows, and you can see how the light would reflect off this horse. And I feel like it definitely brings in what the author is trying to do with the grandfather and making this a very sentimental and special moment in the book. And I feel like that's one of the most thing like that's the biggest thing that this artist is trying to do is to make it simple. But this book is also great about using, you can see there, it shows all the different values and the light reflecting off of the faces. And in here you can see the red bandana, and it it just shows all the shadows and the dark night sky still. And I felt like that was great for this story. Um, excuse me. But another element, I can see if I can find the right page for it. A lot of the texture too, what is great in this book. I mean, the man's wrinkly face, you can almost feel what it would be like to have it wrinkled, and then their hair is very detailed where you can feel it, but that wasn't the one I was necessarily thinking of. I'm trying to find the good picture of it that really showed it. It shows it throughout the whole book, but space. And it was really at the beginning of the book. There it goes. You can see how the space and the usage of space really shows how they are up in the mountains and they are so small compared to their world. And it throughout the whole book, I mean, they did a really good job of illustrating how real it would be. I mean, because a lot in children's books, they make something kind of exaggerative, and they definitely made sure that the space was correct and more real in this book. All right, so the next one I have for value is Hanukkah in Alaska. I didn't think it was this far down, but maybe it is. Oh, there it is. Okay. Now, this is also a great book for value. And I like this one because it shows the different values of Alaska. And also, oh, I'll wait for that part later. But it shows the different values and it goes from the shading of nighttime and the snowflakes. And I like how they showed the shadows of the kids and the light. But one part of this book was how it was dark in the morning and then it became light outside for just a little bit and then it is back to being dark. So I like that part because they showed it and they showed the street lights and how the glow off the school lights, which I liked. And then it's a lot about this moose, but they showed that moose and it just shades and everything is about value in this one. Same way with the color. I mean, you can definitely tell the brightness and everything going on, and then when it's dark time, it's just that part about it really brought the factor of Alaska into the story well, which I thought was really important. Um, so overall, this looks pretty good. I felt like it does have a lot of texture for this book too. I mean, it shows the snow and like the poofiness of her jacket, but that it's bringing out that texture by using those tones and those shadows that would become with value. So Hanukkah in Alaska. So next we have Shape. And the first book I have is Arnie the Donut. And I just saw that up here. Yes, there it is. And Arnie the Donut is about this donut who was made, and it is his. He is so excited. But the pictures in these books are pretty basic. It's all shapes. I mean, there isn't much else going on in the illustrations, but in the way that it's done, it kind of brings the funkiness and fun level that is trying to be found in this book and out more so because there isn't as much detail that would require the I cannot speak apparently seriousness compared to some of the other books like Knots on a Counting Rope, which was the first value book that I showed you. So this one is Shape, and as you can see, it uses basic shapes. Circles, lines is another one that it uses. I mean, it uses a lot of lines, but goodness. I keep trying to make it stop at this next page and it won't let me. There it goes. And you can see the shapes are about the only thing going on in this book. It's just triangles and shapes and lines. I would say lines is the another second element used because it definitely uses the lines and makes kind of these patterns, and it's very basic. I mean, these drawings, yes, they are difficult. I couldn't do them, obviously, but it is not as well drawn to a level that you would think would need to be in a book. It's definitely very basic and definitely, but that's kind of what they were going for, I believe, because this book is kind of fun, silly. It's not necessarily trying to teach a whole lot. It's more of just a book to enjoy. And I feel like bringing these pictures and these basicness of these shapes and lines is how they're showing that in the book. I mean, it's just fun and silly, and that's what the artist was trying to show throughout the whole book. So the next one I have is Me and My Cat. And this one is about this boy and his cat switch places. It's a cute little book. But again, it definitely uses basic shapes.
Hello.
Pause him so that he's not talking over me. But a witch came in. She said a couple words, and then she left. And he woke up the next day and was his cat. How strange, I thought to myself, pulling my whiskers. The boy, switched places with the cat. But what the shapes did is it makes boxes. I mean, it's, as you can see, it's kind of a mixture of shape and lines, because the shapes are, it's a square, it's circles, it's rectangles. I mean, it's basic. It's funky circles for the eyes. But again, this is more of a entertainment book. It's definitely cutesy and fun. And it uses a lot of lines in this book too, to kind of show off the different elements. But they didn't add a whole bunch of detail in them, which is fine. It is perfect for what this artist is wanting, or perfect for what this author was wanting, is what I meant to say. So it shows lines also as a second one, but I would also use form or lack thereof. It's not, it is basic 2D. I mean, yes, there is some 3D, but it's a lot of it's just drawings, and it's basic, looks like it can be drawn on paper. Yes, some of it shows with the lines, but if we can go back to about that one, I mean, there is some form, but a lot of it's just lines, like the toothbrush holder. It doesn't look 3D, and I think missing out on all these extra fine details, but bringing out like the cat definitely helps with the story, and it was bringing up the point that the author is trying to make. So the next one we have would be form. And here comes the garbage barge. Oh, well, that worked out. Now, this one is basically a book about how much garbage is made in, I believe it was New York, and how awful that is. And how there needs to be help with that. The only thing kind of confusing
Welcome to Storyline Online.
about this one was the form was shown, and it definitely brings out the nastiness of it, except the parts the pictures that they showed in this um, video show the form. Obviously, you can see that that is a clay model and it is 3D and the form's there. And I feel like they used that in more of a rough edges kind of way. So they used the form for the rough edges, but it also the rough edges for the garbage. But this book, they didn't really show the pictures of the book. It mainly showed kind of like what's showing on the screen. And it's that's why I was kind of having issues with putting this one in here, is because I'm not sure what the actual book illustrations are. I would like to say that they be something like this, but they don't really show. So again, we have the garbage man, and you can see his chin and how it's made out of clay, and how the form of the 3D-ness really shows throughout, and it really shows everything. But again, it's really hard to tell with this book if this is the art, what the illustrations are like, or if this is just kind of what happens whenever you read a story online. And I feel like that's going to be one of the biggest downfalls that we have while trying to do the books online and doing everything through our computers at home, is we're not going to be sure 100% of what's real and true and what the illustrations actually are, because we're going to have this online factor and they change a lot. Just like in one of the other books, the actually it's later on, but the illustrations moved. I mean, it was more of like a watching a movie than anything. But in this book, these illustrations definitely form and definitely 3D, and it shows how the garbage, and it definitely gives a clear description of how bad it actually is. And I feel like they are definitely using that throughout the whole thing. So in this book, they also, I would do texture as a big one, um, because that you can see the lines and the wrinkles and the cloth of how it would be. And so I want to say that this is an actual page showing in the book, and you can see the details and like the waves in the water giving the texture. Although there would be a discrepancy here, because especially with space, because obviously this man is gigantic compared to this little tiny boat. And it just, things don't add up in the shape department with this book. So that was Garbage Barge. And the next one I have, excuse me, is No More Noisy Nights. And if I can find it. No More Noisy Nights. And this one uses form as well. And I like how this one uses form, and it definitely shows. This is one of those books, it uses form because the details in the book. I mean, it's obviously it's a children's book, but it is a children's book that children are not going to get bored of because of the pictures. These pictures are very detailed and interesting. So with the form, I mean, you can see the 3D-ness of everything. excuse me, and how like the boxes have curves and everything is very, you can see how the form is great in this book and the 3D-ness. And basically what this book is about is, I don't know what he is, a mole, but he's woken up all night long by noises all night long, and it's a ghost. And even the ghost, I mean, with the form, you can see how even the ghost has kind of that 3D aspect of him. Um, I feel like space is also used in this one, space and texture. I mean, obviously, all the elements are always used in every single picture. And so it's really hard to define just one, but I definitely feel like that was a great picture of him. Space is used in this one because it kind of would show the viewpoint. I mean, you can see how the viewpoint is on the floor and how they're looking up and how he's farther away and this box is closer and just all that kind of stuff. And I mean, also the value in this book's really good. It shows the shading and all that stuff from the lights, but definitely form is the one I wanted to put out on because the form it shows, I mean, it gives that 3D aspect where you know that that's he poured ketchup on his toast and orange juice in his cereal, and you can kind of see how that's pouring out and how tired he looks and just the way that he's laying there, he looks exhausted. And so I feel like that's definitely the good way that these artists are trying to do, because in this book it is about how this poor mole is tired and exhausted and in throughout his story. Um, so that, and then the texture of him like holding his space, and that would also come with the form of the 3D-ness. Because when you hold your face, obviously you get those lines. I feel like this is what I looked like this morning while giving my cereal to my 2-year-old. So now let's move on to texture. And I need my monster. That's the one I want. It's a story about this little boy. His monster decided to go on a fishing trip and was like, peace out, I'm leaving for a week. Sorry, there will be no monster underneath your bed. And this little boy was like, nah, that ain't gonna fly, I need a monster. And it goes about each monster. And of course, every single monster, there was something wrong with it. One was because his monster had teeth and no, I believe that was his, yeah, teeth and claws, and his nose whistled. So he went out and he knocked on the floorboards. And I love the texture in this book. I mean, you can see his hair, but a lot of this texture that they used was on the monsters. So, see if I can find a monster picture. I mean, the texture is, you can see kind of how his skin might feel, and how he has horns and the lines in the horns, and I like that texture that they showed. And then there was this monster. She had long, shiny long, shiny claws, not fingernails, and they were painted. But Ralph, I believe professional monsters should always be well groomed, and it shows the texture of the fur in here, and like you can see how it looks like it would be brushed down, and it will be silky, and I feel like that's really what the illustration was trying to do, is to bring out all these defining qualities of the monster and show why he doesn't want them to be his monster, because none of these monsters are ever good enough as Gabe was, which Gabe was his monster. And this little boy just insists on having a monster underneath his bed. So kind of they're all from the normal monster books, but definitely enhances the characters with these. Another one that they used would be color, because you can see how it goes. Again, the different colors in that one, you can see how it'd be kind of slimy, so that texture is good, but you can see how all the colors show it's at night, and how these colors, he's not really scared, so they don't really do any scary, but they try to do the darker colors and show, well, I guess that would be value too, but the darker colors during what's supposed to be the scarier new monster moments, compared to the lighter colors when he meets the monster, he's like, no, you're not good enough. Excuse me. So the next one would be my red-headed older brother. My rotten red-headed older brother. Sorry, I missed the rotten part when I wrote it down. So on this one, it is told, narrated by a little girl. So Trisha can't stand her rotten red-headed older brother Richie, who can do everything better than she can. So when her grandmother tells her a wish made upon a shooting star will come true, she knows exactly what to wish for. To be able to do something, anything better than Richie. So in this book, it uses texture to definitely define kind of how bad Richie is in this book. And of course, it shows the grandma and definitely gives the texture of the red hair, and how her hair is really thin and his hair is really full. You can see just kind of the different texture, especially, oh, I missed it. And grandmother's face in this one. There's so much texture in there, and I feel like in this one, color is also pretty used. But you can kind of see how the texture of like him, he kind of just looks sneaky. And I feel like that's definitely what the illustrator was trying to do, is bring out his character and bring out just the different key points of what this little girl thinks of her brother, and bring out kind of the awfulness that she believes and that he is. And again, in there you can see how her hair and how grumpy she looks, and just kind of, you can see how her eyes have the texture. Another element that this one uses is definitely the colors. Definitely colors, because I mean, this one, white background. It wanted you to focus on what he's doing. And so compared to kind of all of it has a white background, but where was it? Oh yeah, at the beginning here, when they aren't competing, you can kind of see the background of how the chair, but it definitely, most books have a background. Like this part, you would normally expect like to see a sky. So the space in this one is like hardly any. I mean, there is somewhat space, because you can see that she's up front and the two goats are behind her, but there's no background. Hardly at all. in this entire book, and I feel like the artist was trying to show that throughout the texture, again, the texture of the animals, but showing that there is no background to focus on the characters. So let's move on to space. And I chose Catching the Moon and Clark the Shark. And I feel like space was one of the easier ones. Go up here. There it is, Catching the Moon. And this one is a story about a young girl and how she wants to play baseball. And it definitely uses space on this one because you can tell the barn's way behind her and she's down here and he's jumping over her. But it uses that space and showing off the environment to kind of prove what kind of world they're living in. Because she's definitely more on the lower income part of this. I mean, there isn't proper anything. I mean, this is a little schoolhouse. It's kids. You can see it's nothing fancy. And but yet it shows how barren everything is too. So it definitely uses the space to show how much land there is and how nothing's there. And I feel like that is definitely part of the setting that the illustrator is trying to prove, is because, I mean, usually there would be buildings, there would be fancy playground equipment, there would be everything, but there's not. And so it definitely proves the time period and everything else. And it proves there's a part in here where, yes, the mother and the dad were talking, and they're talking about what she might become when she grows up. And then finally, the mother says, "A maid," Mama says softly. So again, that proves the time period that they were in. And I feel like that's definitely what the illustrator was trying to show, was the time period that they were in, by showing how much space there was and everything else in the story. Another one that they used, I'm trying to find a good picture of it. Definitely I want to point out the texture, because like it shows the dirt coming up, and although it may not be done perfectly, it's definitely again enhancing the fact that they are not playing on no amazing field or anything like this. Like, they're playing on dirt. It is definitely lower income and a time period where girls are meant to play baseball. They're supposed to be nurses, teachers, maids, the basic job duties that women had back then. So the other book, and the last book I had for space, was Clark the Shark. And this is a book about the shark who loves school. And he just thinks he's the awesomest thing ever. He is the best thing ever. And I like this one because it uses the shape and how everything's far apart and close together to show how large he is. And that is basically the problem in the story. This shark is huge. And so when he's playing with his other friends, he overpowers them. But he loves his life. He is so happy, but yet this teacher's like, "Shh, we need to calm down and we need to chill out." But I feel like the illustrator was definitely using the pictures to show how big he is compared to everything else and using shape to prove that. Because I mean, it definitely kind of gives the 3D aspect of it because it feels like you're sitting in the classroom and he's sitting there with his books and they're so tiny, but yet these fish are so tiny compared to him, and you can see why he might hurt them. And even though he's trying to be nice and trying to play great, he's not. Um, Another one that this story would use is I'm trying to think of a good one because they're all, again, it uses all of them, but I'm trying to think of a good one that it would use. Again, that uses space. It kind of shows how he's swinging way far forward and how he's scared, and it shows that. Let's go with. See, space was the one that it used the most, and so trying to find a different one is kind of hard. Let's go with the value, because I mean, kind of the sun's hitting it, and you can see where the different parts of the lighter, it kind of gives that element with them. Shows the door and maybe texture a little bit because I mean the pointiness of this fish and the sliminess of this fish, and you can see how her tentacles and all that stuff is. Um, but those are my books for value or for the 7 elements of illustration. And well, thank you. And I hope you enjoyed them. Thank you.